Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Brandon Erickson. He's going to speak about the usual injury in the measuring baseball players, a recent trend.
So by this point, we figured out that the number of ulnar collateral ligament injuries and ulnar collateral ligament reconstructions are increasing in our professional baseball players as well as our adolescents. And we have to think of, why is this increasing? We've talked about some pitch counts. We've talked about some mechanics. But even when mechanics are really good, guys still get injured. Okay, so we have to think about this a little more than just mechanics. So this is a study similar to everything we've shown you today that basically says we know the number of these injuries are going up. Okay, if you look back in the 80s to 2015, and even if you expand this out to 2019, these injuries are continuing to go up, and the number of reconstructions are continuing to go up as well. So we talked a little bit about the UCL anatomy, the medial sided elbow anatomy this morning, and when Dr. Freehill alluded to this yesterday, the ulnar collateral ligament can withstand about 32 Newton meters of force. It starts to fail when it gets a little higher than that. And when you throw a pitch, there's about 64 Newton meters of force that goes across the inside of the elbow. So every time you throw a pitch at a certain velocity, the ulnar collateral ligament approaches its failure. Okay, so we're stressing the ligament really to its brink every time these guys are throwing. And so there's things that we can do to try to decrease the stress on this elbow to hopefully mitigate this risk. We talk about, the ideal pitching motion. Well, probably for every pitcher, this ideal pitching motion is different. Starts at the feet, works its way up through the kinetic chain. The more stress you can take off of the shoulder and elbow, the less likely the elbow is to become injured. And again, the goal here, minimizing the torque on the shoulder and elbow while still being able to generate a forceful pitch that's reproducible in these athletes. And so things that we know that are not ideal for the ulnar collateral ligament based on some previous studies are things like altered knee flexion at front foot contact and when you release the ball, increased elbow flexion at ball release, some early trunk rotation, loss of shoulder motion, excessive scapular internal rotation. These things have been shown in previous studies to increase your risk of having a UCL injury. But I think there are some other reasons why ulnar collateral ligaments are going up. And we talked about this yesterday. We talked about fastball velocity. We talked about percentage of fastballs. Well, this was the study that was done by Pete Chalmers. And if you look here, they basically wanted to see what were risk factors for ulnar collateral ligament injuries in Major League Baseball pitchers. And what you can see here is as pitch velocity goes up, basically linearly, your risk of having an injury goes up. So the players who had a history of an injury went up. And if you look at peak velocity, so average velocity and peak velocity are all correlated with ulnar collateral ligament reconstructions. The other thing that we found is actually weight. So as players get heavier, this was also correlated with a history of an ulnar collateral ligament reconstruction. May speak to the differences between American and Japanese baseball players. Americans tend to be a little bit heavier. If you think about it, there's a heavier moment arm on the inside of the elbow when you're throwing, just from a physics perspective. But we always talk about velocity going up and percentage fastballs going up. So I looked back and wanted to see if this was actually the case. So this is a graph from 2019, so this past year, looking at fastball percentage and fastball velocity. Okay, so the average fastball velocity for the top team in Major League Baseball, which was the Mets, was about 94.7 miles an hour. They threw about 55% fastballs. You go back to 2010, the average fastball velocity in 2010 was 92.4. They were throwing about 60%. So if you graph this out actually from 2010 to 2019, and you look at average fastball velocity, okay? In 2010, in Major League Baseball, you can see what the average fastball velocity was, around 92.4 miles an hour, and you can see it starts to go down from there. That's the team with the highest fastball velocity. As you go out to 2019, you can see this went up by over 2 miles an hour. Okay, and you can see it went up pretty much across the board. So if you I drew a couple lines so you can see the top, middle, and kind of bottom. And a lot of them are going up by, on average, over 2 miles an hour. So we are significantly stressing the inside of the elbow more in 2019 than we were in 2010. Interestingly, though, if you look at the percentage of fastballs thrown in 2010, the team who threw the most fastballs threw 63.6% fastballs during a game, or during the season, excuse me. If you look at the team in 2019 that threw the highest fastball percentage, it was actually down. It was 59.3%. And the same thing if you start to march down the graph here, it's actually declined throughout the entire major leagues. So I actually didn't know this. I thought this was very interesting because I thought the number of fastballs we were throwing was going up, but it's actually going down. So I threw this picture in here because I went to Akihabara the other day, so I wanted to throw a picture of some cartoons in here. But it's interesting to me that the percentage of fastball velocities is going down, because I always thought that it was going up because velocity was going up. We think pitchers are throwing more fastballs. But in fact, at least in Major League Baseball, they're not. So average fastball velocity is going up, but not percentage. When we look at adolescents, we know that they're throwing more, showcases multiple teams. And the question becomes is, when they get to the major leagues, are they more vulnerable to injury because they have thrown so many miles by that point? Is there a set number of miles, a set number of pitches, throws, et cetera, that you can put on the elbow before it fails, kind of like a tire? Is there a set number of miles you can drive on a tire before you have to change your tire? So we tried to look at this. We looked at some players that had Tommy John surgery in Major League Baseball, and we wanted to see where they came from, right? So where in the United States did they come from? And we drew a little line that separated out the cold states on the top of this line and the warm states on the bottom of this line. And we defined that as states where the average temperature during the winter months was above freezing. Okay, so below this map, they were they were warmer than freezing. Above the map, they were colder than above the line, they were colder than freezing during the winter months. And what you can see here is that if you look at this graph, the blue part of this bar graph is the percentage of Major League Baseball players from a particular state. Okay, so the warm weather states are on the top, cold weather states are on the bottom. And if you look at the red, it's the percentage of pitchers from that area that had a Tommy John. So if you look at the warm weather states on the top, there's a much higher percentage of Tommy John surgeries that are coming out of those places than there are players. So in regards to overall Major League Baseball, a higher percentage of players from warm weather areas are having Tommy John surgery, and the thought is that they're throwing year-round. Now, this may not hold up much anymore because you can still throw year-round if you want to in some of the colder states. It's just a little harder to do. And we also found was that when they do have a Tommy John surgery, it's actually happening sooner in their career. So they're younger, and they've pitched fewer years in Major League Baseball if they came from a warm weather state where we think they probably threw more as an adolescent as opposed to a cold weather state. Then the other thing we brought up is weighted balls. And so this is the study that some of us have alluded to by Dr. Andrews' group, looking at a velocity training program with weighted baseballs. And basically what they found was that, yes, velocity went up. There's no arguing that weighted baseballs increases velocity, but it went up at a cost. So there were 4 elbow injuries in the weighted ball training group, none in their control group. And you can see they had a couple of UCL tears. They had some olecranon stress fractures. So I think velocity training programs with weighted balls are also contributing to the increase in ulnar collateral ligament tears, and tears that may be able to be treated non-operatively in our youth, but when players get to the major leagues and they have a history of an injury, it may predispose them to then needing a reconstruction while they're playing in Major League Baseball, so almost falsely elevating the numbers in our major league players. The other thing I think it's important to mention is that we probably still don't understand all the risk factors for UCL injury. You know, we saw this study this morning from Dr. Sagai and his group about what helps contribute to medial elbow stability, because you'll remember I talked about the UCL approaches failure every time you throw. So if there are some structures around the elbow that can help take some load off of the UCL, that would be great. Well, based on this study, it looks like the pronator teres, the FDS, the FCU, that if you strengthen them, they actually help support the ulnar-humeral joint. So if you think about it, if we can support if we can help support the elbow, take some stress off the ligament by strengthening these structures, well, that'd be very beneficial and may actually decrease the number of injuries that we see. So we may see programs that are much more focused on flexor pronator strengthening, first of all, before patients tear their UCL, and certainly afterwards when they get back to throwing, so that we can prevent the revision ulnar collateral ligament reconstructions, because we know that number is starting to go up significantly. These are very excellent drawings and excellent anatomical dissections from this study. So to bring it home, we know that ulnar collateral ligament tears are on the rise in our major league players as well as our younger players. We know pitching velocity is going up. It's going up by over 2.5 miles an hour over the last 10 years. That's a lot when you're talking about going up from 92 and it changed to 94 and changed. We may be throwing too many miles on elbows in kids, so we need to think seriously about sports specialization and having them take some time off when they're younger. And we probably need to better figure out or elucidate some of the risk factors that we can change and modify so that we can prevent these injuries from happening as players get to the major league level. Thank you.